Hey everyone, my name is Robert Herrick, and I'm here today to share a reflection for the third night of Passion Week. If you have a Bible, you can open it up to Matthew chapter 25, and we're going to be taking a look at verses 14 to 29 as we look at one of Jesus' last teachings during his last week on earth before the crucifixion. And as we do this, we're going to read it, and then I'm going to make three observations that are relevant to our lives today. So, let's take a second and just read this. Jesus spoke. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by a story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it up in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. And after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called to them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned you 5 more." The master was full of praise. He said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let us celebrate together." The servant who had 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so I will now give you many more responsibilities. Let us celebrate together." And the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. But look, here's your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least then I could have gotten some interest on it." And then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one whom has 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant away." So, let's make our first observation. First thing we see is that there is a generous master. In the story, the master entrusts the servants with 1, 2, and 5 bags of silver. And for some of you, your translation will say he gave them talents. And don't think like abilities and skills. A talent is a unit of measurement for a valuable metal at the time, like gold or silver. So 1 talent was equivalent to 16 years of labor. Today, that would be $500,000. That's a lot. And so the master was generous with that, but he was also generous in giving trust and responsibility to the servants to manage such a large estate. And likewise, as they serve a generous master, we serve a generous God. Because God is ultimately the one who gives us money, but so much more. He gives us time, our abilities, the things we love, what interests us, our friendships, our families, etc., etc. James says it best when he says that every good gift comes from above. And so naturally, since everything comes from above, that should point us towards being thankful. So let me ask you to think about this. What are you thankful for this week? And how can you be thankful this week in the middle of a time like this? How can you remind yourself to be grateful? For me, it looks like writing multiple things down every day that I'm thankful for, big or small. So first, we see that God is a generous and loving God, that we ought to be thankful. And secondly, we see that generosity ought to prompt a response from us. In 10th grade, our midterms were about to be published, and I had a D in chemistry. Not good. And so I begged the teacher to bump my grade up at least to a C, even though I'm the one who didn't study or do homework. And so I didn't think, and I didn't have any reason for her to change it, but she did. She bumped me up out of grace, and she gave me an opportunity, so I didn't want to waste it. I only had that second chance because the teacher chose to give it to me, and I wanted to use it well. So I worked hard, I studied, and I passed with an A, but only because of the teacher. And so we ought to do something with what we're given. With our time, our interests, and the other God-given gifts, we ought to do something with what we're freely given and not waste it like the third servant does. But we should be getting to work like the first two. If you hear nothing else I say today, hear this: that we ought to try to love God, to tell others about him, and to love our neighbor with everything we've been given and during all the time we've been given as well. That is how you do not waste the gifts that have been given to you. So ultimately, I don't know how you express that or how that looks for you. The master trusts his servants, and God trusts you to be creative and to figure it out for you, since we're all wired so differently. If you're a student like me, and God has given you more free time, use it to develop a wholesome and nourishing prayer life, maybe. If you're fortunate enough to still be working, you're going to have 1,001 chances to be generous, to use your finances to bless and love your neighbors and those around you. Or maybe you have the gift of telling your friends who are far from God how you're praying for them and you're hoping for the best for them in this season. But ultimately, this isn't about your level of success. Following God and being a good steward of his gifts isn't about that. It's about being faithful, trying and doing your best with what you've got as you walk with God. The servant with 5 more bags of silver than he started with, and the servant with 2 more bags of silver with, both get to celebrate with the master in the end. So why do they get to celebrate? Because both of them took a risk and chose to act with what they've had. They invested it, and if you know anything about investing or the stock market, you know that that's risky business. They did not want to play it safe. They didn't choose comfort. They chose to have confidence instead that the master valued faithfulness and their effort. The other servant missed out on this celebration, the joyful, abundant life with the master, not because he failed at doing something, but because he failed to do anything. The only way to lose is not to play the game. So, whether you take the gospel to nations or to your neighbors, whether you feed thousands or pack a few lunches for the homeless, whether you spend an hour a day in prayer or you fight through a busy schedule for 15 free minutes, do something. God doesn't tell us to make good use of his gifts as some sort of test that we can fail. He tells us this because he loves us. He gives us responsibility to use them well because he loves us. He promises life to the full, and he promises celebration and joy like the master to his servants with him here on earth and in heaven afterwards. And so he loves us not based on our performance, but he leads us into true and abundant joy. So friends, as I conclude, I hope you consider this week how you can love God, how you can tell others about him, and love your neighbor with everything that you've been given, about how you can be grateful for every single one of God's gifts, how God doesn't love us based on our performance, but welcomes us into life to the full as we use our gifts to walk with him. So thank you so much for watching tonight. I'm going to say a prayer, and then one of our worship team members, Tori Emery, is going to share a song with us today. So with that being said, let me pray. Father, thank you today for giving us too many gifts for me to say in one prayer. For the doctors and the medical staff on the front lines, give them the strength, the good health, and the wisdom. May our church, may your church flourish and continue to be faithful in doing the good work of Jesus in this time. Show us how we can use all of our gifts and walk more closely with you. Help us to walk in your ways and serve your purpose on earth, here, now, forever, and always. Amen.